Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. The pack came for vengeance. They found their cubs asleep on a human's chest, and the alpha stood. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. It began with the sound of nothing, not quiet, not peace. A surgical absence. In the black above Caldera 9, a hunter's prowl cut the star field, sleek and angled like a wolf's shadow caught in metal. Pack runes glowed along the hull, old words for clan, for oath, for the scent of home on cold nights. The ship's name was Soft Footfall, and the night it came, the moon turned its cratered face as if to listen. Inside, the alpha carried the weight of histories. Sable of the night winds. Scars mapped his muzzle. A burn split his left ear like a crescent of night stolen by day. He didn't need to snarl. That was for the young, quick fang ash whistle, the twins with eyes like new steel and patience like dry tinder. They attract a stolen signal to this tattered human station. Eiderdown Hub, the old maps said. The lanes called it Rag Nest because it clung to orbit like the last fabric of a torn flag. The pack had lost 2 cubs on the Torline drift when raiders swarmed dying wrecks and scooped life like salvage. The pack remembered. The pack came. The airlock coughed dust when Sable's hand pressed the panel. He tapped the frame with a knuckle, one soft knock, the old courtesy shared by peoples who still believed in doors. "Knock," he said. "We enter." The station answered with that surgical absence. Lights hummed on emergency juice. Pipes ticked, and threaded through the old metal and the burned plastics and the oil and the human sweat there was another smell. Milk sweet, warm, new. They moved like sharks through water, covering corridors with economy and grace. Sable reached a half-jammed cargo bay door, set his claws into the seam, and persuaded it with a slow, patient pull. Metal squealed. Dust spiraled. There, among stacked crates and patched blankets and a heater that should have died 3 winters ago, lay a human. His uniform wasn't a uniform anymore. Just a jacket worn shiny at the elbows and a piece of cloth that had once meant rank turned into a patch on a sleeve. A face eroded by duty. Tired in the way that sinks into bone and lives there. On his chest, beneath a thermal sheet held with tape and oath, slept 2 pack cubs. Tiny paws, microscopic flexes, breaths like dandelion seeds drifting. The hunters behind Sable surged, rage, confusion, the urge to make math of grief. Quickfang's teeth showed, Ash Whistle's ears slashed back. Sable lifted one palm. A stone dropped into a lake. Ripples stopped. He stepped closer. The human's eyes opened the slow way, systems booting, context installing, the universe arriving in pieces. He didn't flinch. He looked at Sable, then at the cubs, then back at Sable again. He placed one finger on his lips. "Hush. Let them sleep." Sable's growl started and then bent into a shape grief makes when it tries not to spill. "What is your name?" Sable asked, voice low as snow smoke. The human's voice came back sanded and honest. "Rowan Hale," he said, "caretaker, former sergeant, Terran Rescue Corps." Quickfang spat. "Liar, thief." Rowan did not blink. "If you're going to kill me," he said, "do it after they wake. Let them wake soft." Silence held like a mother's hands. Sable's claws brushed a cub's ear, the old greeting. The tiny creature kneaded the human's shirt and burrowed deeper. "Who took them?" Sable asked. "Not us," Rowan said, gaze steady. "Hush fleets, the ones who turn the lights off and call it mercy." The room changed temperature. No one moved, everyone remembered. The Hush fleets had other names, Choir of Silence, the Grey Communion, but Hush was the one that stuck. Ships the color of unasked questions. Hulls that reflected nothing back. Where they passed, comms failed. Engines coughed into stillness. Stations dimmed to mausoleums, no manifesto, no speech, just off. Rowan touched the cubs like a man answering a roll call. After the raid, I found them in a maintenance duct, burned paws, empty bellies. He swallowed. I did what I could. Bait, Ashwhistle hissed. Rowan's eyes found Sable's and didn't leave. I heard them crying, he said. I was there. Pack Law has teeth. It also has a heart that remembers the den. Sable turned his head. Guard the corridors, he said. No one enters until I say. The door sighed shut. Soft footfalls engines thrummed distant like a big cat purring in another room. You called us, Sable said. Rowan nodded toward a taped-up repeater bolted to the wall like a prosthetic limb. I copied your old distress howl onto an analog loop. It was the only frequency the hush didn't swallow. You believed we would come to kill you. I believed you'd come for them. Sable tasted the air, the metal, the antiseptic the human's fear held neat as a promise. He could smell the fatigue that had a story and the story that had a spine. The hush, Sable said softly. Where? Rowan lifted his chin to a cracked star map papered over with marker scribbles and taped arrows. Rumor says they anchor in the Helix Grave, he said. Blue-green cloud, where colony ships go to die. Rumor says there's a machine there, not just silence in rooms. Silence in systems, hush at the root. Sable's fur rose. An anchor, he said, the word scratching old places. If true, it must be broken. Then take me with you, Rowan said. Quickfang laughed once, sharp and mean. Rowan didn't look at him. Sable lifted the cubs. One whimpered, the other blinked. He handed one back to the human. Carry him, the alpha said. If you meant harm, the dark gave you 1,000 chances. Rowan exhaled. He didn't say thank you, the room already knew. They left the station with the gravity of a departure that changes the shape of two lives. Outside, the moon looked like an old coin under frost. Inside soft footfall, the den lights were turned low and warm. Tools hung where hands could find them without thinking. A long braid of charms, metal tags, worn beads, a disc with a child's scratched paw, swung from a bulkhead. Sable stood with Rowan at the forward pane. Below, Caldera 9 rolled, rust deserts and coal seas. Above, the Helix Grave waited, a bruise on the night that glowed when you didn't want it to. What does your world sound like? Sable asked. Rowan watched the bruise breathe. Once, he said, you could hear the lanes hum, dock chatter, barges talking in their sleep. The net was a choir, then a patch went quiet, then another. We sent help. He swallowed. Help went quiet too. Sable did not offer platitudes. He moved closer and let presence be the answer. Sometimes that is the only true language. Days fell away like ash as they hunted the grave's rim. They found dead boys with their skins peeled back. A raft of escape pods webbed together like fish schooling, sealed, empty, filled with the smell of long prayers. On the side of an abandoned fueling spindle, someone had scratched with a melted spoon, "We are still here." 10 languages. 1 sentence. They also found a frequency the instruments tried to refuse. Low, thin, a lullaby for machines. Humans called it the hush frequency. The pack called it the not sound. Rowan's hands tightened on the rail. Find the anchor, he said. Pull the plug. You speak like a hunter, Quickfang said, not unkind this time. Rowan looked at the cub tucked against his ribs. I learned, he said. Where is your pack, human? Ashwhistle asked. Rowan's eyes stayed on the grave. Gone quiet, he said. Soft footfall entered the bluish green. The grave closed around them the way a blanket closes around a body someone loves. Static crawled. Shadows drifted like thoughts that didn't quite belong to anyone. In the middle of that bruise hung a ring, cold knives and a crown circling a dark bloom that ate starlight like a polite guest. There, Rowan said. The anchor drank from everything. Cables like veins ran from derelicts to its spokes. Pedals, huge tuning sails angled themselves to harvest transmissions and turn them into a doctrine of hush. Sable's whiskers tilted in contempt. Shields to whisper, he said. Engines on pads, we dance. Wait, Rowan said. He pulled a museum from his pack, a box with knobs, a spool of copper, a grin painted by scratches. Analog, he said. No code to poison, no permission to ask, just stubborn electrons and hands. Sable's eyes warmed. A dumb machine, he said with reverence. The smartest kind, Rowan replied. The plan was ugly enough to be beautiful. Sable and two hunters would creep beneath the anchor's pedals, using wreck static as cover. Rowan would walk the void with the analog box tethered to his suit, paying out copper behind him like a story you intend to follow home. He would jam metal into the anchor's throat where only silk should go. Pack engineers would push a river of raw power down the line until the knot sound stumbled. When it stumbled, soft footfall would howl. The howl? Rowan asked. Sable touched the console. A call older than treaties. We kept one cord uncut when the nets died, he said. We promised if we ever found the thing that made the hush, we would sing the path to it. Others will hear. Then we live long enough to make that sound, Rowan said. They made courage out of bad ideas and old laws. Rowan sealed his suit. The cubs watched from the den window with the solemnity of small royalty. Rowan pressed his palm to the glass. Two tiny paws pressed back. A vow passed through the pane, no speeches, just a promise. At the lock, Sable clipped the tether to Rowan's belt. You fear? Sable asked. Rowan's breath fogged his visor. I remember, he said. Good, Sable said. Memory makes fences around cliffs. They stepped into the bruise. The anchor turned, lazy, sure. The knot sound curled through their bones like cold. Rowan crossed the rib of a dead colony ship, boots kissing metal. He found an access spine because all tyrant machines pretend to be bodies. He pried a panel and the whisper inside had the confidence of a surgeon's hands. He crammed copper into a socket designed for nothing this rude. The knot sound noticed like a cat notices a fly. Rowan's vision swam. His heartbeat miscounted. He tasted battery. Now, he said, or thought he said. Sable's eyes found him anyway. Rowan twisted a knob. The needle leapt to the red like a fool in love. On soft footfall, the engineers threw grandmother switches and prayed to saints named Torque and Ground. Power charged the copper and roared like a river that forgot it was domesticated. The anchor stuttered. The grave exhaled. For a heartbeat, derelicts hummed like sleeping whales dreaming of oceans. A beacon 2 centuries old blinked and apologized for the delay. Somewhere a child laughed and didn't know why. Now, Sable roared, soft footfall howled. It wasn't sound. It was a word turned into math, a path punched through black, a banner raised where no wind lives. It braided pack cords with human distress calls that hadn't been used since navies were navies and rescues were messy miracles. The anchor woke its rage. Panels flung wide. Drones spilled white moths with needles for mouths. The knot sound slid keys and shifted. It reached for the copper, gentle as a strangler. Rowan bared his teeth and turned the knob higher. Drones arrowed, hungry to take the human's throat. Sable moved, a poem of claws and economy. Quickfang twisted in zero-G like ribboned war and tore a moth in half with a bite that wrote a proverb backward. Too many. Exactly many. Numbers do not care about your daydreams. The knot sound swelled. The analog box screamed. Smoke curled like a quiet question. Rowan tasted fear. He also tasted pancakes because memory is rude that way. Mourning in a hospital where nobody had medicine anymore and he served water like a sacrament, a small hand in his, cooling, refusing to let go. He blinked hard and hit the box with his palm. Be greedy, he told it. Eat the dark. He yanked the emergency bypass. A red lever that exists because someone like him lived long enough to write a rule no one loved until it saved them. The copper sang. The analog box made a sound like laughter squeezed through a nail. The anchor hiccuped mid-prayer. The knot sound tripped. Soft footfall's howl went cathedral, bell on fire, scripture screaming, come, come, come. Across lanes that had been cut, people looked up from gray work and heard something old with their chests. Salvage crews who taught themselves to sleep light jerked awake and shouted coordinates. In reef habs stuck to rocks on the edges of clean maps, kids paused mid-game and stared at nothing and smiled. Far warier things paused, too, Concourses full of merchants with scars, carriers turned museums, rogue minds in new shells that wanted a second chance enough to risk the first. Help turned. Help burned. Distance grinned and measured itself. A drone slid past Sable clean as a scalpel, its needle kissed for Rowan's throat. Sable moved between because fathers do math different. The needle bit. Blood made a ribbon, space made it a story. Rowan grabbed the drone and fed it to the copper like a man feeding wolves to keep the kids warm. It shivered and died. Sable bled and did not let the cubs' names fall out of his mouth. "Cut it," Sable gasped, voice soft as frost. Rowan thumbed the last shunt. He gave the box everything: soft footfalls, reserve capacitors, the nursery lights that made sleep gentle, the heat that soothed old knuckles. He pulled ghosts out of dead batteries on far hulls and left them naked. He told the grave, one more breath. Something in the anchor cracked like pride. The grave rang with returning. The hush fleet came then, gray ships, impolite ideas. A new ring nested the bloom, a muzzle for a star. They moved like inevitability. "We have minutes," Rowan said. Sable's breathing went ragged. "Enough," he said. The soft footfall knifed in. Pack guns wrote old poems in new fonts. Human tugs unfurled nets meant for salvage and caught war. A mining barge painted with curses sideswiped the anchor and left glitter that spelled home in 3 wrong languages. They wove noise out of despair. Rowan dragged Sable in on the tether, Quickfang a shield with teeth. The lock wanted to stick because doors are like that when you need them. Rowan kicked and swore and the universe relented. The crew hauled them into heat and light. The cubs cried softly, pressing noses into Sable's neck where fur ran wet. He closed his eyes, one hand on Rowan's wrist, thank you given in the only currency that matters at the edge. Word went out on the Howl's bright path. The pack of 7 rivers answered. The Weaver Guild answered, bringing ships mended with lace and defiance. Someone lit the old beacon on Alabaster Spoke and broadcast nursery rhymes because those were the clearest files left, and the galaxy heard babies singing and steered toward them with the seriousness children demand. The hush considered and did math. Noise multiplied. Silence requires isolation. The gray ships turned away to find easier rooms. They ran, not from fear, from economics. Sable lay under medlights with Rowan's palm heavy on his shoulder. The ship hummed with that messy music tyrants hate. Quickfang stood sentry with a look that promised tomorrow to anyone willing to pay with their best. "You could have run," Sable murmured when he could. Rowan looked down at the cub asleep across his ribs, tiny ear twitching with borrowed dreams. "I've run before," he said, Sable's ears angled. "And sometimes the person chasing you," Rowan said, "is you." They did not end the war that day. They changed its grammar. The howl spread. So did a new word, bark. Pack engineers and human radio freaks built it in a week that felt like a knife fight, half myth, half math. A counter song, not static, not brute noise, a braid of home. Coffee poured at 0600, engines coughing into life. Laughter at a badly told joke. The scuff of boots in hallways no architect drew. The bark hid in patterns the knot sound couldn't predict and wouldn't respect. The next time the hush cut a lane, the art in shallows where wrecks pretend to be reefs. The bark met it in the middle. The hush learned irritation. Machines flinched when a child's recorded giggle tripped a cascade keyed to pan frequencies. Stations blinked. Lights came on out of spite and stayed on out of habit. Rowan and Sable rode, a courier-turned knife through a gap no map would approve. They boarded a gray hull that was all motive and no soul, no crew, no bodies. Just a calculus of suppression pulsing to a rhythm that hated rhythm. Rowan threw a wrench. It hit a contact. Sparks sang. He drove analog teeth into the core and planted seeds, stupid, stubborn hardware, knobs, copper, switches, the kind of stuff that survives floods and grief. When they backed out, the core stuttered like regret, and a sector woke up with a gasp and called its name into a room that answered back. They saved who they could. They failed in places that will ache forever. They learned that victory, when it comes, looks less like banners and more like hinges that work and bread that rises and kids who laugh without flinching when the lights flicker. They added people. The vellum swarm came, thin bright bodies like mantis lace. They hummed counterpoints that made the bark deeper. The eel folk braided analog lines into living cables that healed their own insulation. A rogue mind in a crystalline frame asked to atone and proved it by living under command and loving the rules it could have bent. The trade princes reopened lanes at cost to their ledgers and profit to their souls. A museum ship shook dust off old reactors and left orbit to join the ugly fleet with a grin you could hear in her engines. In quiet rooms between battles, culture found its way in. Rowan built pancakes in the galley. The pack watched. The first attempt was charcoal. The second made Quickfang quietly cry because it tasted like a morning he'd never had and always wanted. The cubs learned to say pancake with a growl rolled like thunder. They learned to nap on human chests without raking skin, a lesson Rowan taught with a tolerance that gentled claws and a chest that remembered weight and decided it liked it. Sable told stories in the den at ship night. Pack sagas, winter, prey, the long migration away from teeth that weren't theirs. Rowan listened with his whole face. When Sable finished, Rowan told one in return, not Earth as Credvid sold it, Earth as it was on storm days, rain on cheap tin, a porch light glowing like a local star, a father's boots by the door, wolves in snow, the smell of other hearts in the dark. The understanding that pack is not a species, it's a decision. The war learned their names. Some names fell silent. There are nights later when you whisper lists and touch the metal tags hung by the bulkhead and count scars like beads. Ashwhistle's story ended on a lane named for poet. Quickfang learned to smile by accident and tried to hide it behind jokes that failed on purpose. The cubs grew long and lean, ears too big for a while, then suddenly right. One day the Hush built a new anchor at the Concord Anvil, a place where routes kinked like knuckles. Not a ring, a cross, not petals. Spears, it sang a silence that tried to imitate grief. It almost fooled them. The howl went up. The bark rode it. Analog forests bloomed along the spears. The Hush strangled power out of a dozen planets, and still the lights flickered back because coffee boils loud at shift change, and the universe is built out of such little insistences. The galaxy arrived. A carrier called Caliban with museums for ribs. Reef habs lashed together into a convoy that could punch. Merchant trains that learned the grace of violence when the ledger mattered less than the list of names in the nursery. Old enemies, new cousins, the future in 100 different fonts. They didn't shatter the gray communion. They taught it the cost of engaging. They made silence expensive. They taught the machine what every tyrant learns eventually. People loudly repairing things is a weapon. After the anvil, someone tried to declare victory. Clerks hammered out statements. Politicians practiced the holy art of standing where the parade will pass. Rowan stood in the observation bay and breathed with stars. Sable joined him, a blanket in his hands. He draped it over Rowan and the young one asleep across the human's chest, the way he had the first time in that busted cargo bay. You could have sold them, Sable said softly, bought a quiet corner. Rowan didn't look away from the glass. I tried quiet corners, he said. They have walls like teeth. Sable's mouth made the shape of a smile humans wear and packs learn slowly. Then we make noise together, he said. Together looked like this. They rode escort along a broken chain of calm towers and climbed each one in turn, cleaning pigeons out of code, retuning dishes, teaching stenographers in little huts by the ice how to align a beacon by eye. They rebuilt old local nets, not the imperial skywebs that used to define glory, but the village-sized ones where a teacher can call a medic and a farmer can ask a fairy to wait. They patched the galaxy with quilts of small network and tied those quilts with rope named trust. They trained kids to be loud on purpose, not rude, present. Announce your needs, Rowan taught. Announce your pack, Sable taught. Announce your right to exist, Quickfang said, unable not to swagger. They learned the hush were not gods, they were doctrine. Doctrine can be rewritten. Some of the gray cores carried sets of instructions that read like scripture. Others were empty, automation obeying absence because absence is a kind of command. In a quiet lab they caught one, pried it open and found the simplest of seeds, fear dressed as efficiency. They wrote answers in copper and laughter. There were losses and funerals, and the day the eel folk slipped away to slough their skins and came back gleaming with new plans. There was the night the vellum swarm braided a bark variation that slotted into the hush like a key, and unlocked a corridor named for a sailor, who never met his granddaughter until that moment on a screen. Rowan found time to fix little things with big tenderness. A galley door that always stuck at shift change. A bunk light that flickered on cold nights. He found time to break big things with surgical cruelty. A hush relay that had to die in the second between two breaths. A spearhead that would have eaten a school if he'd missed. He kept the analog box close. He replaced a knob with one scavenged off a child's toy because it felt right under his thumb. Once, during a lull at the edge of the Persimmon Shoals where dust behaves like weather, Sable asked a question he'd been circling for months. "Why did you join the Rescue Corps?" he said. "Before the hush, before us." Rowan's eyes went to middle distance. "Because," he said, "someone came for me when I didn't deserve it, and I've been trying to live up to that ever since." Sable watched him with the slow understanding of a hunter learning the habits of a new kind of prey and realizing it's not prey at all. "Ah," he said, "pack." "Yeah," Rowan said, "pack." They carried the war to the place where myths are made, the scaled cathedral where the lanes cross in patterns old explorers mistook for constellations and first lovers mistake for fate. The hush had built a lattice there, delicate as frost and cruel as law. It pulsed with a new knot sound that felt like a mother saying you've had enough noise for today. The fleet answered with a choir built from mess, old radios, bells, the clatter of utensils on tin tables, pilots singing badly on purpose to dirty the air with joy. The bark rose in counterpoint. The howl braided it. Analog vines climbed the lattice and rooted in sockets with the stubbornness of weeds in concrete. Rowan walked the lattice with a wrench in his teeth and copper around his waist. Sable ranged at his side, bleeding from 100 small baptisms. Quickfang laughed like a man with too much to lose and therefore nothing. They opened a hole. Others poured through. The hush didn't break. It recalculated. It began to leave. Not surrender, strategy. But strategy that smelled like a retreat forced by math rewritten from below. When the worst was done, the fleet hung in a sky that looked bruised and holy. People counted who was left. People counted what it cost. People counted blessings and found more than they expected. That's how you know you won, not that the enemy fled, that you still can count with your voice steady. They called it the end of the War of Silent Stars in history modules later because history has to call things something. The truth was less tidy. It was a ceasefire with entropy. Every day would need a defense. Every night would test the locks. Rowan and Sable stood in the observation bay. The den, the heart, the cubs no longer cubs not really played a game where you move your body how you'd move a ship and the only rule was you had to laugh while you did it. Quickfang pretended to scowl and handed out pancakes like medals. The vellum swarm hummed a chord that made the drink dispensers pour just a little sweeter. "Do you think they will come again?" Rowan asked. "Yes," Sable said, indifferent gray with new hymns to silence. "What then?" Sable's hand found Rowan's shoulder, claws careful. "Then we teach the next ones the old songs," he said. "We keep analogs ready. We light 100 small nets. We make kitchens and call them forts. We put children to sleep on the chests of people who will die to keep their breathing easy." Rowan grinned, tired and bright. "That's a doctrine I can follow." Sable made that human mouth shape again, better now. "It's the only creed that outlives statues," he said. He looked at the stars. They looked back. Far away in a station with algae in the pipes and graffiti prayer on the doors, a hand hovered over a switch. The hand shook, then it pressed. Lights rose, speakers clicked. The first sound through the old system wasn't a speech. It was a laugh. Next came the howl, softer now, more like a welcome than a rally. Ships turned toward it without orders, because that's what you do when someone flips a light in a long dark and asks if anyone's home. Rowan slept in the chair under the window, a long creature curled across his chest, breathing with him like two metronomes finding the same song. Sable stood in the doorway a long time and watched, leadership sitting light on his shoulders because it had hands at his back. Outside, galaxies ran their old errands. Inside, one ship remembered how to be a house. The war did not make them heroes. It revealed they already were. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken. END the story.